Hey everyone, it's Kenton Kavescu here, founder of RocketBlocks, an online platform that helps candidates prepare for interviews. In today's RocketBlocks mini lesson, we're going to be talking about a product design framework I like to call the House of Pain framework that you can use in product design and product sense questions in product management interviews. And I want to cover this because product design, product sense questions are a critical part of any product management interview path. And having a couple good ways to think about how to dissect and frame those problems is really important. So in this video, we're first going to introduce the framework. What is it? Why does it work? How can you think about using it? And then in the second part, we'll walk through actually applying it on an example interview question. So let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, let's start by just laying out the House of Pain framework. And it's really quite simple. It starts with two main questions. What is the pain we're trying to solve? And how are we actually going to solve it? Each of those questions then has two sub buckets that we want to dig into. On the pain front, what is the pain we're trying to solve? We then want to dig into what is the pain the company is trying to solve for, and what is the pain for the customer that we want to try and solve for as well. So we'll dig into each of those a little bit more, but that's the first bucket and the two sub buckets. And then the second bucket of how are we going to solve it? The first question is, what are we actually going to build to address that pain point that we've prioritized? And how are we going to measure that it's actually what we end up building is actually working so we know how to tweak or iterate on it in the future? So ultimately, that's your framework. It starts with two high-level questions, and then there's two sub-buckets under each of them. And if you think about using that framework, it has basically oriented the entire discussion around identifying the pain points of both the company that's considering building a new product and feature and understanding what are their motivations. Like, are they trying to acquire new users? Are they trying to bring in new revenue? Are they trying to defend against a competitive threat? Once you understand that context, that helps you understand what are the objectives this company is trying to meet. Then you can think about, okay, what consumers could we build this feature or product for, whether it's end customers or whether it's companies? What are the segments of those customers? What are the specific pain points that those different key segments have? And prioritize one of those segments that we want to go after, depending, again, on the goals that we've learned that the company has and objectives. Okay, so that would cover your first part of the framework. And then the second part, what are we actually going to build? Then that's where you get into those other two sub buckets around what are we actually going to build? And that's where you think about what could we build to address the pain point we just identified in the first section. And then how would we actually measure if we built that, if it's actually working and addressing that pain point so we know how to tweak. So if you set up that process, that framework for walking through the question, you're going to have a really nice logical problem-solving process to guide the rest of your discussion while walking through a product sense or product design interview. So let's take that framework and now look at using it for an example product management question. Okay, so now let's take our House of Pain framework and apply it to a real-life product design interview question. And the sample question I'm going to use is design a lost item return feature for Uber. This is a really popular product management interview question that they used for years. And so I think it'll be fun to take our framework and apply it to a real life question. And first, just to clear the air, essentially lost item return process means like, hey, if a rider has lost something in a car and they want it back afterwards, like design some sort of feature to help make that process seamless. Okay, so let's apply our framework. And let's start with identifying what is the pain. And on the company side, for Uber, the pain point is probably that if you have riders losing items in cars, that's a frustrating experience for them if they can't get those items back. That may lead to certainly declined customer satisfaction, maybe in the long term, decline retention of those customers because maybe they go to another service where there's a better process, things like that. And ultimately, that will also lead to like probably a decline in revenue if you're losing customers or losing customer sat. Those customers are going to be less likely to bill with you. So I think we'd want to sort of spend some time asking our interviewer and digging into like what are the real motivations there. But I think those are some pretty healthy assumptions that you can put forward and check that this framework is really helping us identify. It's like, hey, If someone loses an item in a car and they just can't get it back and have no way to address that, that's really going to be a poor customer satisfaction experience, and that's going to have bad knock-on effects down the line on retention, revenue, etc. So let's make sure we really create a good customer experience there. And the second thing is, for our customers, what are the pain points there? And if you think about something like a lost item, I don't know that there's a ton of different ways to segment those customers where their pain points around the lost item are different. Like you could think about Uber has, business travelers and, just people moving around the city or wherever they are for personal use. But if either of them lost an item, I think their pain point is really the same. I want to get that item back. Maybe one way you could think about segmenting here and the different pain points that those customers may have is like the severity or the importance of the item lost. So, right, like if I'm in an Uber and I get out, but I leave my laptop bag in there and I've got my $2,000 laptop now sitting in that car and I lost it, that's like a really big pain point for me. Where if I got out of a car and just like forgot my hat, that costs like $20, that's probably a lot less of an issue. So maybe that's a key way to think about segmenting is like there's different classes of lost item. And that might be something we want to then take into account in the product design process, because if someone lost something super valuable, it's going to be really important that they get it back. And if they don't, that's going to create, like a terrible customer service experience and customer satisfaction. Okay, so that is how I think you take the House of Pain framework and use it to frame and understand what are the company's pain points here, and thus what are their objectives, what are they trying to accomplish by designing some new feature here, and what are our customers' pain points, right? Like what are they going to care about? Obviously we'd spend more time digging into this, but this sort of sets up that discussion. Then on the second part is, okay, what are we actually going to build to address this pain? Now we can think about from a purely feature standpoint, if we think that the severity of the item really matters a lot, as we were talking about before, then we're probably going to think about when someone sort of flags that they lost an item, one of the things we're going to want to do is like, how do they actually indicate what is the value of that item to them? Maybe a dollar value or just importance level, something like that. And maybe that's taken into account in then what sort of process happens. Like if it's a hat, maybe that, we design something where a driver can always drop off a hat at some central locale in the city and then indicate to the rider that's what's happened, and the rider can go pick it up there at any point. But it's sort of like, it's a non-critical thing. Whereas if it, a rider indicates, hey, I lost my laptop in the car, maybe that kicks off a slightly different process where Uber will actually just send the driver back to meet the rider to deliver the lost item back to them because of the severity of it. Now, we could think about whether those are the right products to actually build, or the right features to build, and what are the costs and the implications of doing all that. And there would be a lot of discussion, right, in our interview thinking through the trade-offs of those different approaches, whatnot. But again, the framework sets us up for really discussing, okay, what are we actually going to build feature-wise to address these pain points that we've identified both from the company and from the customer side. And then the last part of our framework is when we think about, okay, if we actually build, say, this flow that lets people indicate different severities and then return items in slightly different fashions, how are we going to measure if that's actually working? What metrics are we specifically going to look at to know if all this work we've put into designing a lost item return process is actually paying off? And that's a critical part, because if you don't have that discussion at the end and bucket some time to talk about that, you have no way to close the feedback loop. There's no way to understand if all the work and thinking you've put into designing this feature is actually going to pay off. And this is a real part of product management in the real world. Everything is sort of an ongoing process. So if you don't have metrics and signals and feedback coming back to you after you've built and launched a feature, you'll never know whether it's actually addressing the pain points that you set out to resolve. And remember, going back to our House of Pain framework, the two key questions are, what is the pain point and how are we actually going to resolve it? If you don't have some sort of metrics at the end telling you and indicating whether you're actually addressing that issue, you'll never know. So that's how you'd use House of Pain framework to set up and walk through a product design interview question. One final thing I'll say about the House of Pain framework. There is a popular metaphor in product management that talks about, are you building a vitamin or are you building a painkiller? And the reason people like to use that is because it's a very visceral image of like what actually matters. What is a product that people are really going to use and be drawn toward? And if you think about how people, just normal people in their daily lives, use like a vitamin versus a painkiller, a vitamin's like, yeah, maybe I'll take a vitamin, maybe I won't. If I skip it a couple days, does it really matter? Probably not, right? It's a vitamin. But if you are under duress and significant pain and someone offers you some morphine, right, a painkiller, that's something that you're going to take. And so when you're thinking about designing products, pain is what matters. You want to identify what is the real pain that the company is trying to solve for, and what is the real pain that the consumers are trying to solve for. Because if you set that up correctly and find something that matches in both those areas, that's where really great products and features are built, because there's such a strong need on both what the company is trying to accomplish and what the customer is trying to accomplish. So that's where great products are built. Thank you so much for watching. We have a ton of great content coming out on the RocketBlocks channel on a weekly basis. So if you haven't subscribed yet already, please do so below. There's a big red subscribe button. You'll get all of our content as soon as it comes out. And if you happen to be preparing for interviews right now actively, I highly recommend you check us out at www.rocketblocks.me. We've got a ton of great concept reviews, interview prep drills, and expert coaches that can help you get in the best interview shape of your life. Thanks for watching and have a great day.